Welcome and good morning to everybody. Firstly, thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. I'll be going through how Hyperconverged infrastructure, or HCI, will streamline your IT infrastructure using Dell EMC VxRail and VSAN. So let's begin. Just a little introduction about me. I'm Richard Choi, a solutions architect in the modern data center practice, and I've been working in consultancy services for over 10 years at Ultima. Over the last 10 years, I've worked on on-premise data center projects of all sizes, big and small. My core areas are around server virtualization, storage, data protection, and disaster recovery. Just a quick agenda here. I'll start with introducing what HCI is. Then we'll be giving you some market background about the HCI market. We'll also discuss the drivers for HCI and discuss if you should buy or build. We'll discuss why HCI and VxRail. Also, we'll cover the technical features of VxRail and the use cases. Lastly, we'll finish up with how Ultima can help you. Hyperconverged is an amazing evolution in IT. It's about creating a software-defined data center that combines computing, networking, and storage all together in a purpose-built or purposefully designed hardware deployment. This then allows us to build a giant grid so that you don't have to worry about additional computing power and storage as you grow. The appliance becomes the infrastructure building block. It's designed to be faster to deploy, easier to manage, and it's agile like the cloud. Let's just spend a few moments about the three main architectures and how we kind of got to Hyperconverged today. So the traditional stack, or the three-tier stack, if you like to call that, is the traditional way of doing things in server virtualization. You used to go out, buy your fiber channel array, fiber channel networking, your servers, your different switches, and VMware would layer on top. And VMware were very good to provide us with a hardware compatibility list, but we would still need to design, check matrices, validate testing, and integrate all our services on top. So that's the way we've always done things. Then came Converged Stack, which is converged infrastructure. And this really came about to meet the challenges of accelerating that deployment and ensuring scalability and agility and all the rest of that. So quite a while ago, these converged infrastructure stacks came out. FlexPod, VBlocks, just to name a few, FlashStack. They were all reference designed and ensured that vendors worked closely together to develop a single solution reference architecture. But now it's kind of moved on even further. Roughly about 4 or 5 years ago, Hyperconverged came into the market. It wasn't branded as Hyperconverged initially. It was called software virtualization or software-defined storage, software-defined storage. But basically, this Hyperconverged infrastructure is all about consolidating the disks, the storage, and the compute elements into one package, but also bringing the network integration very closely coupled as well. So I'm going to make a distinction here. The meaning of HCI here, in my terms, is about consolidating, converging the server storage and the networking components. So this is where we are right now, the Hyperconverged infrastructure. So Hyperconverged infrastructure is growing fast. In the segment of Converged Systems Tracker. Year on year, this is growing fast and is in high demand. VSAN alone has more than 17,000 customers, and of which 4,700 are VxRail customers, and this is rapidly growing. This gives us an indication on where the market is heading. So in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, VMware and Dell EMC are in the top right-hand quadrant, being listed as leaders and visionaries. So according to Gartner's research, in the HCI category, it reports that Dell EMC has the greatest HCI choices in operating and deploying solutions for the broadest range of customers. The single point of contract and support between hardware and software is also a key strength. It also continues to talk about VMware provides the greatest set of hyperconverged solutions, constantly innovating with strong integration and ecosystem. It's also identified as a trusted partner as well. So this marrying up of VMware and Dell EMC is quite key to where the VxRail platform sits really. So some of the drivers for HCI comes from aligning to business demands, which is driving IT transformation to deliver better efficiencies, predictability, and business agility. A study carried out by ESG reported that 81% of IT leaders agreed that if they do not embrace IT transformation, their firm will no longer be competitive in their market space. So it's quite a statement. I mean, I think last year when the same study was done, it was reporting perhaps 70%. So there's definitely that sense of embracing IT transformation. We need to change to offer our businesses a more competitive edge. The promise of IT transformation is to reduce Capex costs for those tech refreshes and reduce risk, reducing OpEx costs and the effort to monitor and support your infrastructure, reducing time to deploy infrastructure for those business applications that make all the difference, increasing agility and accelerating to that hybrid cloud model so you get the flexibility, increasing efficiencies and reducing management storage silos, and also increasing performance by avoiding bottlenecks and providing that scalability that you need to grow with the business. So HCI can deliver all on these promises. And we can look at some of these features in particular on how HCI can address these promises. So about simplified management operations, you can kind of imagine in the old world where we used to have we may still have this, a separate server team who manages the servers, the compute, and the server virtualization. And they're separate away from the networking team, who are experts in their own right about the LAN, WAN, and also storage administrators, which have, again, their own team as well. Now, these three teams will typically have their own tools for configuration, for monitoring, capacity planning. So no matter if you're designing a new infrastructure to meet a new project, or if you're ongoing operating this environment, across the three teams, it costs you a lot of admin time in administering, expanding, designing. It's quite complex to operate. Now, in the hyperconverged infrastructure world, because we've consolidated all three technologies simply down into one system, you're left with one tool and one team. And that drastically makes a big impact on your administration time and time to deploy and design and expand. So all your configuration, health check, performance monitoring, and capacity reporting is all done in one area, and everyone gets that visibility. So it really simplifies your management operations. Customers want scalability, flexibility to scale up and scale out as the business grows. They're also looking for a simple way to scale in a way by adding more disks if they need more storage capacity. So in a typical hyperconverged infrastructure, you build up on these single nodes and you build up a cluster from these nodes. And inside the nodes, you can add in disks to scale up just on storage capacity. Or you can scale out by adding both compute and storage capacity in a more granular way. So it really improves your agility and scalability to scale in both ways, compared to the traditional sense where you'd have to buy maybe more disk shelves, disk configuration, and also more server nodes to scale out and up for storage. So I'd like to talk about the reduced Capex and server-side economics. So we know, as we've used many traditional SAN vendors before, whenever you're buying any SAS disks, flash disks, or expanding more I/O ports, These SAN ratified components often cost a lot more than their server-side counterparts. So if you're buying a NetApp disk or a NetApp expanding more I/O ports, the cost is substantially higher than what you would have to pay buying server components. But we know they're often a similar type of component. So what we're saying here, it really is, because the hyperconverged infrastructure is built on commodity server hardware, the components are a lot cheaper, so your outlay on your capital expenditure is a lot less. Also, whenever you need to expand on any nodes, it's built up on the same components, which is substantially cheaper than your traditional storage array. Also, we'd be eliminating the fiber channel array as well, because there would be no need for fiber channel networking devices. This is all working on Ethernet switching. Okay. Let's talk about how HCI is predictable and cost effective as well. So drawing on that cost perspective, in a traditional SAN, we know every single time we have used our SAN for maybe 3, 4, 5 years, and it's up to that point where we need to consider buying a new one. It's mostly a forklift upgrade. So there's a very high or large upfront purchase cost just for storage alone. So you start the cycle again and again. And whenever you need to consider expanding and scaling up your traditional SAN, it's quite expensive. The scaling on this is often hard to predict with your demands, so we often buy more than is needed, and we tend to expand in larger chunks, which cost more. The high cost may come from expansion shelves with specific disk configurations, which has a scalability limit, and in turn, this may force us to buy new controllers altogether. This all contributes into more cost in the traditional way of scaling, and it's complex and difficult to plan out. HCI, by comparison, as I've said before, it has a smaller outlay, smaller upfront cost in buying and developing your infrastructure, because it includes both compute and storage with server-side economics. So you can start smaller with a 4-node cluster, 5-node cluster, and scale up. You can scale up more incrementally, either with more disks or one node at a time. And because it's more granular, we tend to cut closer to our demands and therefore make it more efficient to expand. And you also get more predictable outcome from this as well, because as you're adding each node, you're gaining both compute performance as well as storage capacity. So it's a very modular design and very granular. So why now? So there's 3 factors really governing why HCI is being prevalent now. Firstly, the technology has changed. It's changed a great deal. We have more compute cores and CPUs, more RAM density for DIMMs, more slots. This performance has changed as well. From the old SAS disks offering 200 IOPS, we now have SSDs providing up to 200,000 IOPS in some cases. Also, we have high throughput through networking components from the old 1 gig. Now we have 10 gig, 20 gig, 40 gig, and these server components are cheaper than before. So the technology has shifted and made it possible for us to deliver high performance needed in the HCI model. So that's the first point, the technology has changed. Second point is HCI is a mature platform now. It's been out for long enough with major releases and implementation in many use cases. It's considered for most workloads. Storage trends are also showing that all major vendors, SAN vendors these are, they're all investing in their own HCI offering, which says a lot. And lastly, I like to think HCI is very relevant now as it's efficient and cost effective. Many IT departments are being asked by businesses to do more with less, and you have to do it faster. So HCI can really help lower the Capex while saving you time and effort to deploy and manage it. So if you agree that HCI is possibly a platform for you, you're now faced with a couple of decisions, whether you buy it or you build it. So let's just talk about building your own. When you build your own, it can be a substantial task with many components to consider, and many lists to check for compatibility, and you have to build everything yourself. So you kind of have to ask yourself, do you have any time for this? If not, what can reduce this time and increase your success for deploying the solution? Dell EMC may have the answer for you, as the HCI portfolio ranges from VSAN ready nodes to appliances to rack scale systems. So we'll talk a little bit about on the far left. You can choose a more customized approach by building your own. So what does that mean? You can select from a list of pre-validated hardware lists, so they're called VSAN ready configurations. But you kind of have to do your own capacity analysis and work out what kind of consumption you need. And then you can order the VSAN ready nodes. You configure cable and deploy the VSAN ready node with VMware standard support and Dell standard support. So it's more customizable, but you have to take on a lot more work yourself. Now, in the middle, where we've got more guided approaches, where the VxRail appliance comes in. This is from VMware validated designs using this turnkey appliance. It simplifies your deployment with guided wizards, and it can self-build certain components and patching thereafter. And it also has a single support between the hardware and software. So this would be an easier way of guaranteeing your success for deployment of HCI. And then on the far right, you have a lot more automated experience where you can consume simply into your infrastructure by buying into the VxRack. It's a fully automated system that builds from bare metal and covers all the lifecycle management, and it's built on the reference architecture of VMware Cloud Foundation. So you can simply roll this on site and consume into this product. I'll talk a little bit more about the VxRail in the next slide now. So VxRack is the hardware solution coupled in with the VMware Cloud Foundation software components. It's a single thing that you order from Dell, and it comes pre-racked with your VxRail nodes. So these are the appliances that make up your compute and storage. So they will use the same VxRails that you would otherwise build yourself. It comes fully fitted in the rack. They come with the management switches, top rack switches, rack interconnect switches, all pre-cabled with UPS, all configured, ready to be deployed. The VxRack is also very scalable as well. So just to give you an idea, this can scale up to 8 racks, up to 192 nodes. So this is really large multi-tenancy environments that you can build out to. So a bit about the software stack that sits on top of this hardware. Well, VMware Cloud Foundation, it's architecture that VMware have come up with. You have vSphere that gives you your server virtualization, vSAN that gives you your storage virtualization, and NSX that gives you your network virtualization. So this brings together that hyperconverged idea of server storage and networking together in one solution, in one architecture. And on top of that, you have a software console called SDDC Manager. This helps you automate the build-up phase, configuration, expansion with guided GUIs, and also helps you do single patch management across all these components across the entire stack. So VMware Cloud Foundation is your core infrastructure platform. It's synonymous with software-defined data center. So once you've got this built out in your on-premise data center, you can start consuming using your, putting your workloads on there. So some other services that you can consider as optional components that you drive into there to build up your private cloud is vRealize Suite. Now, vRealize Suite then makes this into a private cloud solution because this is the cloud management suite. With vRealize Automation, it gives you the automation orchestration between different components so you can build out your services and expose that onto a self-service portal where your customers or your internal staff can make requests and consume and build out things in this infrastructure. vRealize Operations gives you the insights on monitoring, smart alerting, capacity planning, predictive analysis, that sort of thing. Log Insights examines all the logs across all your hardware, amalgamates that and brings that into operations. So when you're looking at troubleshooting, it's all searchable and makes it easier. And vRealize Business adds the commercial element to this. Allows you to put metrics in and seeing how much your infrastructure is costing you, how much your specific projects are costing you, and you can compare your cost between on-premise and cloud infrastructure as well. So once you've built up the private cloud, you can then layer on other services like VDI. So Horizon Suite can give you that desktop experience on top of this VMware Cloud Foundation. And you can even build into vSphere integrated containers for your DevOps opportunities. So all of this stuff can be built out in your private cloud and even edge. You can also have the same architecture in the public cloud, but more on that little bit later. Now, the software stack goes across from private to public and is an architecture that you can build out your hybrid cloud strategy. So let me delve into how VxRail or how Dell can really help you in all three areas. So we talked about the core. Core is pretty straightforward. We mentioned about VxRail and VxRack. They're products that you can deploy into your on-premise data center, and you build up with that. That's pretty straightforward. Now on the edge, it's quite an interesting proposition. Last year, VMware announced Project Dimension, which extends the VMware cloud to deliver SDDC infrastructure and hardware as a service to customers' on-premise locations. So this cloud service means you can log in and set up sites. So imagine if you had 20 remote sites, all requiring 2-node clusters, 3-node clusters, infrastructure. The challenge there really is supporting these many sites with IT staff, setting out, designing it. What this service does is it can take all this away from you and help you with managing these edge sites. So you can set up these sites on the console. You subscribe and define how much compute and storage resources you need. And what Dell EMC will do is they will send an engineer to site to install a hardware package. What's included in the hardware package is your VxRail compute storage nodes, together with switches, the UPS, and SD-WAN appliances to connect this into the VMware Cloud Dell EMC service. So as a web portal, monthly subscription, cloud consumption model, you pay monthly, and embedded with this service, they all come and install the hardware, configure it. It includes the cost for hardware, software, support, and also managed services as well. So if there's a component failure, Dell will be responsible for sending an engineer to replace parts. So all this is included in a monthly charge. So it's really taking away all those infrastructure tasks away for you, should you want that. So customers can then focus on applications and services to differentiate their businesses. Okay. So the last part is really about the cloud. So what's quite interesting is also this is extending the VMware Cloud Foundation into the public cloud. So in the public cloud, AWS and Azure, AWS and VMware announced a service called VMware on AWS last year. Basically, they have a set of hardware already in the AWS cloud where you can go and rent into a 4-node cluster. So it's a cloud-based consumption model, but you're essentially building out a VMware Cloud Foundation cluster in AWS. What this gives you is it allows you to build out your VMware Cloud Foundation across your core, edge, and public cloud. So with NSX, you can actually link the connectivity across all your infrastructures, giving you that true hybrid cloud strategy. But being in the cloud, public cloud, the workloads there have direct access to public cloud services. So if you want software as a service or platform as a service, you can directly interface some of the more legacy workloads directly in the cloud. So it's really quite an interesting thing you can build up using the strategy. So I'm going to delve back into what the VxRail is and why we should be looking at this. So VxRail, like I said, is a turnkey appliance. It's been jointly engineered by VMware and Dell EMC. So there's real tight integration. It's faster time to value, as we've talked about. It really simplifies the operations by providing you transparent features up into vCenter console. It allows you to patch all those software, VMware software and VxRail firmware things in one simple patch release. It also delivers automated configuration for connectivity as well. So as part of the one design, you can have a VxRail deployment with automated network configuration. So not only are we saying that you have bare metal configuration on your vSAN cluster using VxRail, but it can actually go and configure your network switches as well. So for new tech refreshes, this can really reduce the deployment times. So Dell's proven a unique approach has 5 pillars of value that we really believe in as well. The solution for VxRail is engineered together, so it lowers your cost and risk versus building your own system. It's manufactured, so it gives you that faster time to value. It's managed and well integrated together, so it's simpler to deploy, scale, upgrade, secure, and monitor. And that single support makes it faster and simpler to problem resolve. And it's a sustained solution architecture where software packages are pre-tested, pre-certified before the code is released to customers to upgrade. So this really reduces the downtime, lowers the cost and risk for future upgrades. So let's have a dive into what the VxRail comes with and the components with it. The VxRail has a list of hardware models to pick from, but I'll talk a little bit more about the models. On top of that, that's where your vSphere and vSAN sits. So vSphere is the ESX server software, VM-kernel. vSAN integrates the VM-kernel, so this is the server and storage virtualization all coupled into the appliance. vCenter server, as you know, is the management for all your vCenter, vSphere, ESX server, and vSAN configuration. Now, when you buy into VxRail, what distinguishes it against other build-your-own vSAN-ready nodes is it comes coupled with a VxRail manager. And this is the bit that allows you to have that guided installation. It can self-build your nodes in the first instance. It can help you expand, and it gives you one push button upgrades. Okay, and this is well tightly integrated into vCenter console as well, so you can see a lot of that. I mentioned about the network configuration. So if you buy into this package of VxRail appliances together with Dell switches, you have the opportunity through the feature of Smart Fabric for VxRail. For when you're deploying VxRail, it can also configure your network switches as well, and it can also expand on your network switching capability as well. For DR replication, Dell EMC have a recover point solution that allows you to bridge the gap because in VMware you only have asynchronous replication. Recover point adds to that a synchronous replication technology to protect your virtual machines in a DR situation. You've also got that single support that I mentioned between the hardware and software. So it's just one single call to make if there's any problems. They'll be naturally monitoring the whole infrastructure solution stack for you anyway. So if there's a disk failure, they will send out the part to you to be replaced. And I believe they also collect a number of metrics from your whole solution stack and can give you some more information, alarms and alerts on your entire HCI stack as well. And lastly, I mentioned about the patching. They go through pre-validated testing, and these software packages are released at set intervals, usually quarterly, and the packages upgrade all these components in one go. So it really eases that management and operations an effort to checklist and supporting matrices, and eases your management on all of this infrastructure. So yeah, I just want to spend a few moments to distinguish between VxRail or VSAN against the typical HCI. So when I say there's a lot of HCI products out there which use a similar concept where there's a server appliance, but the way they deploy the storage integration is very different. They do this by using a virtual machine, a storage virtual machine, and they configure the VMDKs that layer on top of your physical disks inside the server. So really, these storage VMs, they consume a lot more resources. So compared to VxRail or VSAN, because VSAN is integrated in the kernel, it uses a lot less CPU and memory footprint compared to that of storage VM. So the difference really here is because if you're using a storage VM, you'd be taking away these resources away from what would have been used by your workloads. Also, the data paths are very inefficient or different, let's say, because it's going through a VMDK to access the disks. It's different. Management is often bolted on. Their presentation is using the LUN presentation. So you have LUN storage management. With VxRail and VSAN, you have that supported native vMotion DRS. You also have that single simplified management plane because VSAN is integrated into ESX. So in the vSphere web console, there'll be tabs on your VSAN components to monitor, manage, and configure this stuff. So you get all that monitoring and stuff built into vCenter Server. And also, it's got a very different take on deploying storage. In the old design, where you have a single LUN and you put your virtual machines on there, that single LUN becomes a single unit of where you can configure different resiliency or replication or performance. Here in vSAN, you have a single data store, but we apply these attributes to a per VM policy. So we can actually have one VM with a different resiliency requirement, so RAID 5, RAID 1, or N+3, N+4 on a single virtual machine versus another. So it's not really down to that limiting LUN anymore. You can actually drive policies on performance down to a virtual machine. So VxRail comes in 5 flavors. So you can buy these hardware appliances in different form factors, let's call them. Yeah? The G series give you that compute dense form factor, where in that 2U rack, think of it like a blade chassis. You can put 4 blades inside. So in that chassis, you can have 4 nodes that you can build up your nodes into. E series are simply 1U pizza box appliances. Your P series is performance optimized. So these have the more beefier CPUs with higher spec power supplies. You got V series for virtual desktop optimized, and the S series for storage dense. So this one comes with more slots and more expansion, storage expansion, disk expansion modules compared to the other ones. So whatever you need, you can probably pick something from one of these form factors as a recipe to build up to your workload requirements. So another point about that singular management stack. On the hardware level, you've got VxRail Manager that manages all the patching and upgrades and deployment for ESX server, the physical server, and vSAN components. And above that, you've got SDDC Manager that kind of manages more of the software components like NSX, vCenter, vRealize Suite. So they work coupled together for deploying these components as well as patching and upgrades. So a lot of other vendors, HCI, they may, or even VMware Cloud Foundation, you just have their SDDC Manager. You're losing that feature-rich management from VxRail. So yeah, I'm not going to read every single point here, but the key here on this slide is basically when you buy into VxRail, this automates more than 200 configuration tasks that you otherwise would have had to do manually by yourself if you build your own. So the key here really is that it automation speeds up your deployment. So I mentioned previously that no matter your protection requirements, in VxRail, there's a protection solution to meet any RPO and RTO. And what does that mean, really? So when you're coming to design your disaster recovery solution, you're often faced with what are your RPO requirements. If your RPO requirements are 0, so there's no data loss, you can't suffer any data loss. So you'll be in that territory of configuring a stretch cluster. But at the moment, without any other VMware, well, within VMware software, you can't actually do the synchronous replication. So at Dell EMC, they've got the recover point solution that allows you to do the synchronous replication. And you can still use your vSphere replication to meet that asynchronous replication needs. And anything beyond minutes, hours, days recover points, then it's really in that backup and recovery and archiving territory, which Dell EMC have data protection suites to help you meet those needs as well. So really the key here is VxRail protection is to meet any RPO and RTO. There's a solution for you there. There's a new feature that VxRail released this year called ACE, Analytic Consulting Engine. ACE is a cloud-based predictive analytics that uses machine learning to help manage applications. So it centralizes data collection and performs analysis to streamline the monitoring of VX clusters to improve service and help make better decisions. So earlier on, I mentioned about a single support thing that you have dial home to Dell. So really, they're constantly monitoring a lot of touch points, a lot of metrics from your solution stack. And from that, it can show you your health score, any alarm status for your entire HCI stack. And ACE can actually assess the impact of present and potential future issues at the cluster and node level to help pinpoint for a resolution. Alarms are also linked to Dell knowledge base articles, helping you to reach a diagnosis earlier. So it's quite a cool feature. This is a feature that they've released at no additional cost. So if you've already got VxRail or you're buying that, they constantly bring out new features. So that's pretty cool. Let's just touch on the VxRail use cases. Now, VxRail with VSAN, it can suit any need. We've had customers use Hyperconverged to replace their entire virtual general purpose environments. We've had customers who maybe for certain critical applications deploy specific all-flash VSAN clusters just to meet those business applications. It's a very good use case as well to develop a virtual desktop platform on as well, which is the best practice to segregate your virtual desktop estate away from your server virtualization. And we talked about remote offices where you have many remote sites where you have 2 node clusters, so you can build up using VxRail nodes. And of course, the test development as well. Being software defined with VxRail, you can build up your container objects to suit that test DevOps kind of environment. So it really does meet most of your use cases that you can consider. Just going to cover off 3 typical scenarios. The scenario 1 really is stretched cluster. This is an active data center design where you have a single VMware HA cluster spanning across 2 sites. This provides 0 RPO or no data loss as data is synchronously replicated between the sites. And in the event of a disaster of a single site, all VMs are failed over automatically using your vSphere HA to the surviving site. So we have a number of enterprise customers who really like this design where actually it's one logical cluster and it's about disaster avoidance. There's no failover steps, no button to press. Immediately, if a site fails, all your virtual machines immediately start off in the other site. However, with this design, it comes with its difficulties, let's say. So really, 3 things must be met for this design to be delivered. you need firstly a very good network. So typically a low latency, less than 5 millisecond round trip time. Typically we've seen customers wouldn't even consider this unless we've got something like resilient 10 gig links between sites. We also need to have stretched networking, but with VMware Cloud Foundation, the NSX component can look after the stretched LAN across the two sites. So your subnets existing in one site are all available in the other site. And the third point really is about you need to have a third site to act as a witness to mediate automated failovers. So this is quite a cool design. Okay. The second scenario is probably more typical, where we have the classic active-passive data center design, where a separate cluster is deployed at each site. So in the production site, we've got cluster A, and the recovery site, we have cluster B. The two separate clusters, and what we're doing here on the underlying technology is we're replicating virtual machines from the production site to the recovery site. So you have passive offline copies of your virtual machines. Now, as I said before, the replication technology, you have a couple of things to choose from. You can use the vSphere replication, which is asynchronous, or you can opt into Recover Point to do a synchronous replication mechanism. And then on top of that, you have Site Recovery Manager to manage that failover procedure. So that streamlines that procedure. So really the key here is VxRail with VSAN is compatible with a typical active-passive design using the SRM solution. Yeah, so that's scenario 2. Scenario 3 is that ROBO edge site kind of scenario. So at the data center, you can build up your VxRail, VMware Cloud Foundation infrastructure at the data center, but at the edge site, you can then build up your VxRail 2-node cluster, 4-node cluster, however many sites you've got. But you can make it very cost effective by buying into these software license packs. So in the vSAN world or VMware world, there are these ROBO licenses that you can buy. They come in 25 VM packs. So rather than using the CPU-based licensing, which can cost a lot more, depending on the number of virtual machines you have at the edge sites, using these virtual machine packs could make it a lot more cost effective by deploying this like an edge to data center kind of scenario. Okay. So I've talked a lot about the hyperconverged infrastructure and vSAN, VxRail, and how this could help you work smarter and a lot harder, not harder. Ultima can help you on your HCI journey with our vSAN and VxRail pre-sales experts. So you can start by registering a vSAN or VxRail assessment, which is free. This will give you a quotation on the hardware software cost. We can also help you understand what the design and deployment service would look like. And lastly, after implementation, Ultima can also provide managed services for your infrastructure as well. Thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions, please reach out on email or reach out to your account manager. Thanks very much.